They literally saved millions of lives. And then you get congenital idiots. And it's rare I say stupid. These people are not just stupid, they're willfully stupid.
Yeah.
They're embracing stupidity and feeling superior about it afterwards.
Yeah.
If you look at graveyards, old graveyards, you look pre-vaccines and look at the age of people who are buried. Children are buried up until vaccines come along.
When you see people online who like rubbish the vaccine, how how does that make you feel? I think you're the first guest we've ever had on it. When I was researching you, I've actually got it here now. I read your Wikipedia, and it says your bit about your education. And even when I have it here in front of me now, I don't understand it. So I'm just going to try and read it now. So your Wikipedia says you have a PhD in ecology, a BSc in biology. You worked as a biomedical scientist as well as a research technician in the Department of Biochemistry at the University of Oxford. And this is my favourite bit, where you studied researching the brains of insects.
Yes.
That's the only bit I get.
Yeah. Well, I just have degrees and stuff. I just never left school. So even though I was like a bad student and bored, when I went to university, it suddenly got interesting.
Right.
And I was there for 10 years. So I stayed. I did biology. I really liked it. And then again, by accident, I ended up doing a PhD. So my friend Nadine got the flu in fourth year, just as they were about to go on a field trip, and it was really short notice, so I went in her place. And it was an ecology field trip. I hadn't planned on doing ecology at all. Had a brilliant time. Like really, really liked it. Went out to the west of Ireland with Professor Downs and Professor Griffin, who ended up being my boss, and just had a whale of a time. Did my fourth year project in their lab. Then while we were doing field work, which was all on insects, we were digging up tree stumps in the mountains in Ireland, and to get the insects out of them, one of the people who worked in the lab said, "Hey Bones," which is my nickname, "do you want to do a PhD?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And I ended up doing a PhD.
So obviously you've got your book coming out, which is all about our bodies and humans, but you've also got all of this PhD in insects and stuff. How is that like learning that's two different things, isn't it? Or is there a lot of crossover with that?
No, so there is a lot of crossover. Okay. So, quite a lot of how our cells work is basically the same. That's conserved over history. How we get energy and all that kind of thing. And if it's not exactly the same, it's similar enough to get. Mm-hmm. But the level that this book is written at is the stuff that I did for like my degree. It's stuff I did in school. It's not very high level technical stuff. When you do a PhD, when you go into postdoctoral research, your field is so narrow. Like we were looking at like single molecules moving around in like inside nerves, literal single molecules at a time using really fancy microscopes. But we narrowed right down to studying just a couple of genes. And that's what happens. You become like mega specialized. The broad stuff that everybody can understand, it's from a long time ago, but it's still there. It's still universal knowledge. And I did some research. I looked stuff up.
I would love to have your brain for a day. I would love to know what you know.
I'd love to be able to kick a football properly. Maybe we could swap.
We don't want his brain then.
I read online something about you. You said you had to wake up at like 3 a.m. and shake bottles of worms.
Oh yeah, that was horrific. So because we were applying these in water and they're living things, if you leave them for long enough, they settle to the bottom and they suffocate essentially. So you had to mix them up to get air into the solution. And they were really, really heavy bottles. They were like 5 and 6 litre bottles. So you couldn't put them on a shaker. We had hundreds of them. So everybody had to take turns of coming in every 3 hours or every 4 hours to shake them. And I brought in a sleeping bag and slept on the floor of the lab, but security caught me and kicked me out. So I had to go home, sleep for 2 hours, get up, shake the bottles, come back.
Oh, wow. What were you trying to learn with the worms in the bottle?
They were the ones that kill the insects.
Oh, okay.
So they're microscopic. So we came up with a solution though. So eventually we just tilted the bottles and put an aquarium pump with the stone that bubbles up.
Yeah.
And that bubbled everything up and kept them in solution because, we weren't going in for another year to shake the bottle. So we applied a scientific method to fix them.
God, it's fascinating, isn't it?
So good.
I see, that's why I couldn't do it.
What, waking up at 3 a.m.?
Because I'd just be like, nah, fuck it.
That's not the real crushing thing about science is for the vast majority of the time it doesn't work.
Right.
So you try things over and over, just changing one tiny thing at a time to get it to work properly
and
consistently. And it's soul destroying. Sometimes I spent 11 months trying an experiment that I ended up just having to abandon.
What was the experiment?
Was trying to see how closely related the different strains of worms that we had were, to see if the populations were interbreeding. But it turned out the two that I was trying to test were different species. So yeah, so I couldn't understand why they weren't doing. And then the method to do it it's laughably out of date now because you just sequence stuff now and it just works. But in those days, it was fairly early on in genetic sequencing and it was really expensive. So you had to do this other molecular method and nothing I did made it work. It was heartrending.
So what he's saying there is, nah, fuck it. Doesn't really work when you're doing a PhD.
11 and a half months I did that. And I ended up getting like 11 pages or 12 pages in my thesis. Just one little chapter basically saying why it didn't work, how much I tested it. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But it meant that the person after me didn't have to do it.
What's your favourite insect?
My favourite insect has to be the fruit fly. I loved working with fruit flies. They're brilliant to work with. I know everybody hates them in their house, but in the lab, they're perfect. They're really like keeping pine weevils in the lab is a nightmare. Keeping fruit flies is dead easy.
What does a pine weevil look like? So I can
It's
imagine
like a fairly large black beetle with orange spots, big long nose, and its antennae are on the end of its nose.
Right. Okay. And going back to the fruit flies, you have to remove their brains, right?
Yeah, with a scissors, a really small scissors.
So you've got your microscope.
Yeah.
Oh God, there's so much I want to know, but I don't have to formulate the question. So there's a fly there. And that's are you holding that in a little?
So we were working with larvae, so little maggots of them. So they're caterpillars essentially.
So even smaller than a fly.
No, larvae tend to be bigger
fly.
than the adults.
Do they?
At the biggest stage, the pupae tend to be, yeah.
Oh right, okay.
But they were about the same size. So a few millimeters long, and then you put them in water, and it's kind of horrific. If you did it to a rabbit, you'd be arrested. But they're a lower animal. They don't experience trauma like higher animals do. You pin them down to like this sort of rubbery stuff on the bottom, and then you just cut them with scissors and remove the brain.
What does the brain look like?
There's no nice way of saying this.
Go on.
It looks almost exactly like a cock and balls. Look it up. Do Drosophila fruit fly larval brain. Almost exactly. And like, honestly, that was one of the first things when they were doing diagrams. It says, there's no other way of looking at this. It's two optical lobes and a big long ventral nerve cord.
Oh my God. I'm so glad I asked that question.
Wow. And then so and you really need to dumb this down for us.
Yeah.
You get the brain out.
Yeah.
What are you doing then with that brain?
So what we're doing is the brain already has been mutated with genes from jellyfish that glow in the dark. So this is a common thing. It's called green fluorescent protein, and there's multiple different ones. And you can tag any protein you like with that so you can see it under a microscope. So if you want to see where a protein is, you just tag it with GFP, and then when you put a fire laser on it, it emits a green dot and you can see it. So they're already in it. And then we'd label RNA, which is one half of the DNA strand, a little section that makes the protein. So we'd label that with other colors, and we'd look at multiple colors at once, seeing where the protein is, where the RNA is, and how all of that is controlled at the ends of nerves, basically. So we're trying to understand, when you make a memory, it happens really quickly.
Yeah.
So if you remember me walking into this studio, that's already wired into your brain. Because your short-term memory is really short.
Right.
And that means that something has changed in your brain. There's been a structural change in your brain somewhere. A synapse has grown, a connection has been made.
Right.
But that's quicker than it's possible to make the proteins needed to make that synapse. So when your cells need to make proteins, it takes longer than that. So we're going, how could this happen? Because a nerve cell is really long and thin. Nucleus is down one end. The transport alone would take hours, never mind minutes. So we and other people have sort of hypothesized that it's all done right at the end really quickly. And to do that, you need to have the RNA, which is the instructions from your DNA to make that protein there. So we were looking for which RNAs were sitting at the end of these synapses. So that would give you an idea of which ones are involved in new synapse growth, which would mean you'd know which ones are involved in memory formation and memory loss. So it's trying to narrow down which gene is needed to make a memory.
And the bigger picture of doing that on a fruit fly is
to in 20 years, when someone's doing it on mice or human cells, they can go, okay, what's been done already? You go, oh, in flies, it's this. The equivalent genes in human is this one. Let's look it down. So we were able to do literally thousands of different genes using vast numbers of animals. You can't do that on higher. It costs too much. It's ethically wrong.
Right.
So we're able to narrow the choice down.
Yeah.
We're going to go, these 10 out of the 2,000 that we studied are of interest. And then people can go, okay, we'll take those 10 and we'll study them in mice. So it can reduce, all science leans on each other.
Right.
You go, what's been done already? Where's the gap? So we narrow those gaps right down for people who might be studying for disease understanding, targets for new drugs, that kind of thing.
Science is incredible, isn't it?
And it happens like we're not the first step. There's yeast cells do it as well. It's like it all leads into each other.
And is this so we eventually know how to help humans?
Yeah. Well, when you hear of a new drug being developed, it's usually developed against a protein, usually, not always, but usually. And that research has to come from somewhere. They have to know what that protein does. So it can help animals, humans, and just general understanding. I did it so we'd know what was going on. I didn't really want to go down the medical route.
With knowledge as vast as yours is, when you see things like obviously COVID happened and now there's the whole monkeypox thing, does your brain kind of go a million miles an hour with that thought, or do you just go, it's probably not that much of a...
No, it happens. Pandemics happen. There's not...
I don't think we understood that.
We were kind of overdue one.
Yeah.
They usually happen every sort of few decades, and they hadn't had a really big one since the early 20th century, since 1918. So, since the Spanish flu. So they happen. We had lots of potential ones like SARS and bird flu and stuff that could have taken off but didn't.
Yeah.
They still killed a lot of people, but, they didn't go global. So we were just overdue one.
Is monkeypox something you're worried about?
I'm not worried about it, but I wouldn't want to get it. It looks awful.
Right.
Like, it's in the same way that lots of diseases are terrible,
And again, we keep saying it, but as a smart person, when you see people online who like rubbish the vaccine, how how does that make you feel?
It's so frustrating. It's so frustrating. I know people who basically wrecked their lives to make that vaccine in Oxford. I personally know people who worked 16 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
They were working overnight and in shifts and everything. They literally saved millions of lives. And then you get congenital idiots, and it's rare I say stupid. These people are not just stupid, they're willfully stupid.
Yeah.
They're embracing stupidity and feeling superior about it afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's heartbreaking because we're having comebacks of diseases that we had kind of beaten.
Right.
Like measles is coming back. Measles is a really dangerous disease. Everyone thinks you just get a few spots. It can really damage you long term. It can make you deaf and all. Oh, that's mumps. It can do all sorts of stuff. Mumps as well is coming back because people have stopped taking vaccines.
Because of
cranks.
And
it was all based on one individual who I'm not going to name because he doesn't deserve the publicity, but one individual was essentially bribed to say the MMR vaccine was dangerous and they should take a different vaccine. He wasn't saying vaccines were rubbish. He was trying to sell a new one.
Oh. But that was enough for people to
go, that's definitely it. And it's just snowballed.
So fucking dangerous.
If you look at graveyards, old graveyards, you look pre-vaccines and look at the age of people who are buried. Children are buried up until vaccines come along.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. When smallpox was around, the first vaccine came out against smallpox. When smallpox was around, you were more likely to get a job if you had smallpox scars because you were immune, because it was that dangerous.
Wow.
It's bonkers. And now we're basically throwing ourselves off a cliff that we've built for ourselves. It's not even just that you can just leave them alone, because you need a certain amount of people to protect the people who can't get vaccines. You have to have herd immunity. You have to have a large enough amount of the population. If enough people don't get it, then genuinely normal people who can't get vaccines or the vaccines don't work for will get sick. It's phenomenal. The moon landing deniers, nutters the lot. To a man. Yeah. I posted up a thing, I do an On This Day in History one where it was about, one of the things was the moon landing. And the amount of people are like, oh, I thought you were smart. They feel so superior. These keyboard warriors who know nothing, who believe some guy who lives in his basement, his mother's basement in America, who's definitely right, but NASA is lying to you. It's like, the validity of their sources, just think.
Yeah.
And genuinely, if you're looking at an argument and you go, okay, there's a series of experts, 99% of scientists say this, or 1% of scientists say maybe not, generally go with the 99%.
Yeah.
Might well be the 1% guy is right, but chances are he's not. And to be honest, it's always a he. It's never a woman.
Wow. Yeah. Just absolute nutters saying all that, because a lot of the arguments is, this footballer's had a heart attack. and he got the vaccine. It's like
Yeah.
footballers have been having heart attacks for years.
Yeah.
Like Mark Vivian Foe was a West Ham footballer that passed away before COVID was a thing.
Fabrice Muamba.
But the numbers are just like staggeringly against their argument. Like,
Right.
if you look at people who were vaccinated versus people who weren't.
Yeah.
And if you take into account their age, because they always don't do that, because older people are more likely to die from COVID, it's like orders of magnitude. It's hundreds of times more likely to get really sick or to die.
Yeah.
It's not even small. It's not even close.
Right.
But truth and evidence is nothing to these people, because if they actually looked at evidence and they did it with an open mind, they would not hold the position they're in.
No.
And we need to stop taking them seriously. We need to laugh at them. I called them congenital idiots. If you hold a laughable position, you should be laughed at.
This is the thing as well. Like often in the job that we do, Stevie, where we rely on having an audience. We're often told sit on the fence about certain things. Like people will kick off at us saying this, but if you don't believe in vaccines, we don't really want you listening to the show anyway, because you're a nutter. You did score some great goals for Southampton though, so that's.
Chances are, if they don't believe in vaccines, they won't be with us for very long.
Right. But they won't get autism either. So there's that.
Yeah.
Not a transmittable disease.